Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion today, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Scott S., Kirk O., Greg S., Mary K., Brett S., Ken G., Warren M., David W., Michael D., Raymond T., Dave W., Joseph C., Greg S., Mike R., Benny B., Tony S., Mary S., and Cal W. Due to the amount of questions we received and time limitations, we're not able to cover all questions and subject matter for this episode. On the podcast today, we have returning guests, Mr. Brian Reinsborough, President and CEO, and also Mr. Chris Sembritzky, Senior Vice President, Exploration, representing Recon Africa, are with us for this episode. Recon Africa is an onshore Namibia-focused oil and gas exploration company which holds concessions over about 6.3 million acres of untested and prospective oil and gas plays, both in fold belt and rift basin style plays within the region, where the company is currently advancing work at the Kavango West 1X well towards production and appraisal testing. The company also holds an MOU over 5.2 million acres of prospective oil exploration concessions in Angola, as well as about 1.9 million acres in Botswana. Further, on the pipeline of projects, Recon Africa also has a 55% working interest and is operator of the Ngulu offshore exploration block that has existing oil discovery in the Republic of Gabon. Recon Africa is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol RECO, as well as on the US OTC markets under the symbol RECAF. Brian, Chris, it's good to have you guys back on the program to update. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you for having us, Andrew.
Yeah, guys, good to have you back on. Why don't we jump right into it here? You guys have been busy and some news has landed out there. We've received a lot of questions on the recent discovery news at Kavango West 1X. I'd like to just get to opening comments from each of you before we dive into some details and more questions. Brian, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. 2025 has been a great year for Recon. We progressed many of our initiatives that we set out early in the year. In Namibia, of course, we're progressing the exploration program really well. Chris and his team and the operations in country just drilled a really exciting well operationally. I was very pleased with how it worked. Progressed our technical work in Namibia. Chris will get into that a little bit later. We also progressed our initiatives across the border into Angola. We signed the MOU back in May timeframe, really as protection acreage in the event that we had success in the drilling we've done. So we're really well positioned there. And mid-year, we expanded into the offshore up in Gabon, an asset that we really like the risk profile of it, like the exploration inventory there. We're going to have some really good 3D. So we advanced the company many different ways in 2025, and I'm just really pleased how it's ending. The note that Chris's team have drilled in the Kavango well. So great year overall, great year for shareholders as well.
Chris, any follow-up comments?
Yeah, I mean, I'll dig a little bit deeper into Namibia. Last year, we spoke, Andrew, about our Nangopo well. We were really excited about what we found there. Again, we've talked about the petroleum systems elements, source, seal, reservoir trap. We found all those elements last time, but the trap. So there was a lot of lessons learned that we took from Nangopo to take us to this well that we recently drilled, which was Kavango West. And what we found is all of those elements. So we'll talk about it here in a little while, but the next step is to get a production test and see what kind of flow rates look like. So we're real excited about this. I think that we've got a lot of other prospects here and on our block. We've got leads that we're looking at in Angola to just complement what we have here in our acreage position in Namibia. So we're really excited with what we've come up with so far, and we're looking forward to the next steps.
Lots of things to progress on here in 2026. Brian, thank you for your comments as well. Brian, just high level here. What does it take to open up a near frontier oil and gas play such as this? There are big risks. Speaking of, what you guys have come out with so far with Kavango 1X, just talk about some of those risks that are still out there and from a geological perspective and your thoughts on opening up a new play in Namibia.
Yeah, well, listen, I've done this before, and Chris has done it before as well. And bottom line, just takes a lot of really good technical work at multiple levels. The original group at Recon, I felt, did a really good job at projecting what the interior part of Namibia is going to be like. They predicted a rift basin, and sure enough, there was a rift basin there. Shot seismic and started to identify this thing called the Damara Flow Belt. But the dynamics really changed when Chris came on board. Actually, I'll let him walk through his thinking process as well. But what he and I and the team did is we really challenged ourselves to really dig into the data hard. Very luckily, the wells the company drilled over the rift 4 or 5 years ago, although seeking unsuccessful, they had a ton of data collected. And that data really provided Chris and his team the information database to build up the petroleum systems analysis of the Damara Flow Belt. I'll let Chris walk through how he thinks through that, but on a broad level, you really have to have that in place. You have to have a long-term strategy in place to look at a new play. You have to have a lot of resilience, because quite often the first well you drill in these new plays, you learn a ton of information, and you need to use that information to go to your next prospect. No better example was when we drilled Ngulu last year, although what was not a commercial success. Chris mentioned we learned a ton of data information on that, and the fact the information we found on the Ngulu really made us pivot from a prospect that we were going to drill called Kavango to Kavango, and that was the right decision. I think we had some pushback from a bunch of people that was going to take a longer period of time to get Kavango ready, but that was the right technical commercial decision, and it was based on the data point we had in Kavango. So you have to have that resilience, you have to have that technical sharpness to be able to pivot really quickly, but you have to have staying power. Typically you don't get everything in your first well. You have to drill a few more of these to find out what you actually have. And I think the Damara Flow Belt story is not over yet. There's a lot to be learned on this upcoming production test. We have upwards of 19 prospects and leads identified in Namibia, but that's just on the seismic that we have. So there's a lot of area in our concession beyond that seismic grid that we need to understand, and a little alone over in Angola. So, who knows how big this play is? We like what we have here a lot. Chris and his team have done just an excellent job of trying to build up the fundamentals of the petroleum system. We challenge ourselves all along the way, and we're in a good spot right now in terms of our understanding, but a long way to go. It takes a lot of patience, a lot of resilience, and some capital to do it.
Chris, why don't we jump over to you and get your comments you want to add to what Brian said there. And with that, let me just couple it with this next question to move along here, was that the company announced that it intends to move to production testing as the next step in lieu of drill stem testing. Talk a little bit about that, as well as what zones you would suspect to test first, maybe upper net pay zones, lower zones, any expectations on the hydrocarbon mix, any indicator on dominant hydrocarbon shows, and any characteristics that you can tell us about at this stage.
So just back to your original question, Andrew, about opening up a new play. One well rarely opens up a new basin play. And, if you keep in mind, we're on the eastern side of this, what we call the Etosha Kavango Basin. It's 700 kilometers in width and well over 500 kilometers in length. So we've got a lot of acreage. If you think about Namibia itself, there's around 15 to 17 onshore wells. Namibia is 1.2 times the size of Texas, where we have 2 million, and there's still a lot of exploration that goes on in Texas. So we got a long ways to go with this. But again, what we want to find out when we drill one of these wells is there a source that's available, and are there hydrocarbons in the system? And then we work out the rest of the petroleum system elements. So back in 22, we drilled the Kawe well. That Kawe well drilled into the reservoirs that we're chasing today, which is the Atavi and specifically the Hootenberg and the Eland-Shook formations. And when we drilled that well, we took rock data, we sampled that rock data, we found that we had hydrocarbons in the form of oil, we had lots of gas shows. So there's a lot of evidence that we had a working petroleum system here. We just needed to put the kind of the other pieces together. So really, we've got 4 wells that have penetrated the Atavi, 1 again in the Kawe, 1 in what we call the Etosha 51A, which is a long ways away, but that was the only data point that we really had. And so with Nangopo, again, we proved that those petroleum system elements, but we needed a structure. Brian mentioned that we moved on from a well location that we thought was going to be, the lowest risk, which was Kumbundu. But once we learned what we had in Nangopo, we realized that Kavango West, had a very simple, clear structure, not a lot of internal complications with that structure and trap. So that's why we moved to Kavango West. And at Kavango West, we've got all of those elements that we've discussed. We had the shows both in the form of oil as well as gas. And so now we've resolved that we have all those elements. The risk now is what is the deliverability of those hydrocarbons into the wellbore? We know we've got a very fractured carbonate. We see that from a lot of the wireline tools that we have, including the sonic and what we call the formation microimager. So we can utilize that data to identify, fracture swarms, which we've seen in most of the wells so far. So now the question is that we're going to go in and we're going to test. And you've asked how we're going to test. We're going to do a production test versus an open hole DST. And what this is going to allow us to do is isolate specific zones. The format that we'll take is we'll go to the bottom of the well and we'll work our way up. So we're going to start in the Eland Shook at the base of the formation and move our way up. We don't know how many intervals today we're going to test. We're working on that right now. We've got our operations crew, going through the procurement steps at this moment. And so hopefully late Q1, we'll take this on through Q2 with our testing, and we'll have hopefully another discussion with you, Andrew, and tell you that we've got a lot of hydrocarbons flowing to the surface.
Looking forward to that discussion, guys. Chris, thank you for walking through some of those next steps. Brian, just any other comments that you want to add to what Chris said, and then we're going to move on a little bit more here.
No, listen, when we saw the results of the well and the logs, our partnership pretty quickly pivoted to the production test. Logs gave us everything we could on this well, and the next logical test is to do a dynamic flow. So we came to that decision very quickly as a partner. Now we're going through the procurement, trying to figure out where we can source the materials. We already bought the pipe. We hope to be commencing operations in the first quarter on this. And as Chris mentioned, we're going through our planning right now. We don't know how many zones we're going to get. The technical engineering teams will figure that out in early January. It could be up to 8 zones. We have a lot of section here to evaluate. We want to test this such that we leave no questions unanswered on this one. So we're anxious to get after it. This will be Namibia's first production test. So a lot of eyes are on us internal to the country and the industry, of course, just because of what we're testing. But we are happy to be in a position to do this. So I'm excited about what the technical and operation teams are going to be doing here in the next couple of quarters.
With that, why don't we just skip a little bit ahead here? We'll get into some other topics here in a moment. We've got a lot to cover here, but as far as resource estimation, I know this is coming down the pipe. This isn't immediate. Talk a little bit about how that will be done, Brian. Who will prepare the estimate as far as maybe a third party, when that would expect to be accomplished, as well as just talk maybe some of the broader play estimates from maybe internal thoughts versus maybe NSAI, and of course, reference there to full belt or anticline.
Yeah, I mean, the way you go at this is you have decision gates. We just went through a decision gate on this well. We got good results. We liked it. And that decision was moved to production test. What we'll do coming into the production test is plan a wide range of outcomes, from a success case to a medium case to a low side case. Crystal's team will map all that out based on the results of the well. And typically, industry protocol is you then move to an appraisal well, which it'd be something that we would think about. You would do that because you want to get resource extent away from the well bore. And at that point, we would then contemplate doing a resource report through NSAI with all the data we have. So a couple more decision gates to go through. We got a scenario plan, and we'll go down the path with whichever one comes out of the production test. So that's the sequence of events right here. Luckily we have the driving rig on site. It'll be doing the testing. Then we'll probably do a pretty thorough rig evaluation, because we're going pretty hard at it for the last year or so. then get ready if the outcome is positive to proceed to potentially drill an appraisal well. That's the sequence of events. You know, we're in a good spot right here. We control the rig. It doesn't have to go anywhere. It's low cost. We're excited for this production test and then scenario plan after that.
Brian, to follow up there on that, the appraisal, when do you think that would fall in, roughly, of course? And then with that ideal location for that first appraisal, what do you think on that?
Yeah, if the outcome is positive on the production test, we would probably move to a production test. Likely to the south, we have a bunch of EIAs already approved. We'd like to stay within radius of those, but we also want to drill on some seismic lines. Remember, this is a 2D grid on the structure, so we really want to keep the well location on a seismic line. So we're looking at some options to the south part of the structure. Chris and the team are working it pretty hard. They'll work a whole series of scenarios from appraisal testing to let's see what we have, to look at other options if it's a negative outcome. You're always biased on the success side, so we like to think about that all the time. So we'll plan in that and see what comes out of the production test.
Chris, any thoughts that you wanted to add there to what Brian said about the appraisal?
Yeah, so right now we've got essentially 4 locations that have been identified. Those locations really kind of work their way down the structure. So they're, as we move down the structure, we're going to be moving further away. So, we don't want to step out too far, but we want to make sure that we're utilizing some of our data, like specifically, drilling on seismic lines. One of the things that we'll do is when we test this well, we'll have an idea of kind of the extent of the container. So, how far out are we seeing some of these pressure pulses? What's the deliverability, right? Be able to calculate some of that. That's going to help us identify potentially where we want to drill those appraisal locations. And so that's why we're basically looking at 4 of those locations, so we kind of cover the whole profile. And then after we, if we have a successful production test, we drill the appraisal well. What we would typically do is we'll set in pressure gauges in the original well, Kavango West. Then we'll go and we'll actually production test likely that appraisal well, and then we'll be able to understand the communication between those 2 wells, and that really gets you to a place where you're pretty confident in your resources that you turn into reserves. So we'll look at working with NSAI. Again, typically we'll send out an update at the end of Q1. We'll probably send out that update, but we'll probably do the majority of the work after the production test comes. So we'll likely see something from NSAI later in the year as well.
Appreciate that. Good extra thoughts there, Chris, on how you're looking at this. With that, Chris or Brian, any insights as to your partner, BW Energy, their views and opinions of the results so far, and how is that teamwork going?
Yeah, I can start and then Chris can follow up. Listen, we're extremely pleased with our partnership, both BW and NAMCOR. BW, of course, is here in Texas, the technical team. Chris speaks to them when they're drilling probably almost daily. They're very involved technically and provide good guidance operationally. But also, I spent some time in Namibia a week ago with BW. We had some time with the president of Namibia. BW was there. And also what I like about them as partner is their industry intelligence on gas development in case that this is a gas discovery. They've been looking at the supply and demand markets around Namibia for a number of years now because of their offshore Kudu project. So they bring a lot of midstream and downstream experience to the table that we plan to utilize. We have a very open relationship with them, talk a lot about strategy on how to execute a play like this, but we're very much aligned. And then we're bringing NAMCOR along as much as we can. They're more of in the listening mode right now, but they're pleased as well. All 3 of us were with the president a week ago, so that was a great opportunity for me to speak on behalf of the partnership to the president of the country, and they were pleased with what we found as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a very productive trip. We'll talk a little bit more details of some of your other visits and stops along the way here in a moment. Chris, anything to add to what BW is thinking? And of course, NAMCOR there is a great group to be there listening to and working with folks with your experience.
Yeah, on the BW side, I always wanted to bring in a partner that could help us complement the technical work that's being conducted. So as Brian mentioned, I talk with BW, not every day, depending on what we're doing. And so they've been very, very complimentary. That was kind of my focus. Originally, Brian and I had a lot of discussions on bringing in partners, and I wanted to keep a lot of this. If we were going to bring somebody in, we needed to have someone with technical prowess. And we had that with BW, with their experience with Namibia, but also what they're doing with Gabon and Brazil. A really strong technical team to the front. So, and with NAMCOR, lots of discussions with NAMCOR. They've come a very, very long way since we originally started working with them, and we do get a lot of complimentary thoughts and advice from NAMCOR as well. So it's a great relationship right at this point.
And let me add to that, Chris, because it comes to a little bit of our strategy in that when Chris and I were looking at partners, I view a partner as contributing technically to a project, which BW does, and Chris and their counterpart over there has a great relationship. But I also view a partner being a little bit of an external audit on our work. And you want someone who will test you on your thinking, particularly as you open up these new plays, because there's so much unknown. And I really feel that BW has brought that element to the table. They do challenge us. They challenge Chris on his thinking, a very open dialogue. They challenge us on operations as well. So that's sort of what you want as a small company. You want that external auditing component as part of your thinking process. So I'm pleased with the role they've played on that as well.
And I think NAMCOR would also add a irreplaceable partner in the sense that they have the domestic stuff sorted, all the supply chains, the local relationships, dealing with the people on the ground. So really invaluable, the relationship here that you guys have set up. Brian, just with your thinking on rough timing and capital costs to get to first hydrocarbons, and I know this is very speculative, but we all understand that. Just getting material to market here, FOB, Walvis Bay, Deepwater Port, for example. Just talk briefly, high level, of course, because we don't know yet in full, but some of the scenarios you guys are thinking of when it comes to storage, truck transport as initial method, separation if we get into oil and gas, potential for small scale power production in the case of finding a quick home for the gas. Just talk high level here. I know this is very future looking, forward looking, all that fun stuff, but just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the best way to describe some of that is the work we did pre-drill, because we did modeling on different economic scenarios, oil, gas, and mixtures of the two. So we wanted to really understand, are both commodities valuable? And the analysis we did pre-drill is that gas is very valuable. Oil, of course, is more because of pricing. But gas is also a very valuable commodity. And luckily, if we do have gas in this area, we have an electrical line right through a concession. I've driven under it a bunch of times. It goes south into the South African power pool. So if there is gas, there's a line close by to go to gas to power. But we also pre-drill model liquids. There are some good highways up in this northern part of Namibia. I've driven them. They're paved highways. There's a lot of 18-wheelers on there because of the mining sector. So if we have success coming out of the production tests and future drilling, all hands will be on deck to get to first production. And it'll probably be a phased development. That's the way we model this pre-drill. Bring 2 wells on, 4 wells on, and build up the capacity. And this truck into Walvis Bay, there are highways all the way to that port, or trucking or rail. There's a rail system about 100 miles away called Guthan Train, and that's an option for us to offload crude into that rail system and get it to Walvis Bay as well. We're in a good spot. The last thing you want to do opening up these new plays is find a resource base that's stranded. And we're not stranded. We're in a good spot for gas, whether we go into that electrical line, going north into Zambia or south into the South African power pool. If we happen to find a mixture, then we would strip the liquids and re-inject the gas until we have gas to power, and then switch to sales. But we're in a good spot for both commodities. Our analysis pre-drill shows that the PV of oil is really attractive, and the PV10 of gas is also really attractive. So I like that. But our goal will be to be the first production Namibia has. And that's sort of the advantage you have being onshore, is the cycle time, cost structure is very conducive to get things on quickly. So we want to take advantage of that card that we've been handed here in Kavango Well.
Really appreciate the comments on how you're looking ahead on some of these issues that will certainly come up in the future here. Chris, just to add any comments to what Brian said there about some of these scenarios, and then also with that further seismic work in Namibia, and also spilling into Angola on seismic. What can you say on plans regarding seismic in both countries, as well as maybe some rough timing to deliver on those studies?
Sure, I'll jump to the side. Like I think Brian covered, how we're going to handle our hydrocarbons if we're successful there. So sticking with the Kavango West prospect, again, we talked about our appraisal well. We feel comfortable drilling that appraisal well off of the 2D. This is a fold and thrust belt, so there's some complicated structures, and this is a 3D problem. So right now we've got 2,700 kilometers of 2D, but that's not good enough for us. So when we want to move to more appraisal and development. So my assumption is we're successful with the production test and appraisal well, we'll move on to a 3D plan that'll cover this entire structure. And we may look into, while we're doing that, doing some 2D sparse data just to kind of fill in some holes where we think we need it. But again, that's subjective to what we end up finding with these two wells. As far as Angola goes, we have an MOU that's set up with AMPG. We have a very, very large concession, over 5 million acres. At this point, what we plan to do in early 2026 is collect a lot of surface samples to help us understand some of the geochemistry in the area. And we are planning on having a grid of 2D seismic that's laid out currently today, about 700 flying kilometers. And with that, although we've got a very large area, it's not a very dense program. What we're going to be able to discern is where are the edges of the basin, the Okavango Basin, the Etosha Basin, but also the Rift Basin as well. We've got data that suggests that we think we know where we're at based on some gravity and magnetics, but we really need to kind of hone in and define where those fold belts are, where that Rift Basin is actually located in Angola, and then later on, you would follow up with a higher density 2D or even 3Ds at that point.
Chris, that sounds good. I appreciate the comments on some of the other side activities I suppose we're working on and some of those future things that will be happening in Angola, maybe some of this in parallel to the work there in Namibia. Well, while we are on Angola, Brian, you also made a visit there. Just any updates and things you want to add to what Chris said and objectives for 2026 in Angola?
Yeah, really, it's a continuation of what we're doing in Namibia. Chris mentioned the MOU was a really good strategic pivot point for us. We get in there at a really low cost of entry, really as a protection acre to the fold belt in the event that Kavango worked. And then here we are with a great result in Kavango and looking to see where this fold belt goes. We'll deploy a very methodical exploration program. That's what you're seeing play out in Namibia. We'll do the same thing as we move north into Angola. We'll take all the right steps to help de-risk that area, whether it's the seeping, whether it's a regional grid, and then a more detailed grid. That's how we operate. And the other thing I want to just add from what you asked Chris just a moment ago, what you're seeing play out here is a very well thought out exploration program. We are not afraid of being trailblazers. In fact, it's part of our DNA to do that. It's how we're wired. But it's all data driven, it's all technical driven and strategic. You saw our move into Angola, very strategic move there. You saw our move into Gabon to help balance out the portfolio. A little bit of early mover in the Gabon, somewhat under the radar screen. We've been there at a fairly modest cost of entry, and we really like what we're doing there. So, real time, you're seeing a really well executed plan by guys on my team who I believe are some of the best in the industry. So, it's fun to be part of this. I have a ton of confidence in Chris Sembritzky and his team, and shareholders should be really pleased to have them leading the way in the exploration side.
Brian, thank you for that. Certainly some good stuff here coming down the pipe and continued work. Appreciate you talking about that and going back over the strategy and really the well thought out process you guys have put together here on a substantial change of direction for this company in the past, looking back at the past year. Just switching gears, we need to talk about Gabon briefly. Assessment of existing data for the Ngulu block. Any updates there you want to mention, Brian? You guys are going through data, reassessing, redoing everything. And then those objectives that you guys would like to complete in 2026.
We like this asset a lot. It has a full spectrum on it, from a discovered field that we need to understand and drill an appraisal well to an exploration inventory. Right now, we're working with the Gabonese to get all the data in our hands. We've got one tranche of data already. I'm working with a second tranche right now, and hopefully we'll have all the raw tapes, the seismic data come across our way. And then, this has been under evaluated for the last, 10, 15 years. So we plan to use state-of-the-art seismic reprocessing technologies that I and some of my team have done in the Gulf of Mexico for a long period of time, and deploy Gulf of Mexico style exploration, because that's the play type here. So I really like what we see on the Gabon asset. I think there's a ton of potential. Again, we have to have a very well thought out methodical exploration program. We're going to progress that next year. The first out of the chute is the seismic reprocessing, which will hopefully start in January, last about 5 months or so. And then on the tail end of that, we'll have a resource report put to the market to see what we have on the field and the exploration inventory. But we like what we have here. We're getting in early. I'd love to build an asset base in Gabon. It's a little bit under the radar screen. There's so much attention right now in Africa, and Namibia, Angola, places like Nigeria. We got in here. This is a producing province. The country produced around 220,000 BOEs per day as infrastructure there. We're in shallow water. This is not deep water, so we're in about 50 meters of water, about 10 kilometers away from the nearest infrastructure. So again, a very clever strategic move for the company to get in and build our platform and give an inventory to work with.
Very excited here to look ahead as to what you guys continue to progress with Gabon here, and also another pathway towards cash flow, which of course is the focus of the company here. Chris, anything you'd like to add to Gabon?
Not a lot, Andrew. Brian touched on it, but we're kind of going into an area that really hasn't seen much activity quite a long time, specifically offshore, but also onshore. There's a number of opportunities that we continue to look at to complement the Ngulu block. But one of the things that Brian, has experienced in the Gulf of Mexico is that technological change that we saw with imaging salt. And we have a salt province here, and a lot of the structures are related to the movement of salt. So technology that was utilized in the early 2000s has never really been brought to this area. That's really what we are looking to exploit. The original exploration program were to drill just kind of the post-salt, so the top of the salt where these structures are created, but the imaging on the sides of the salt bodies as well as below it has never really been worked. And so that's the bread and butter of the Gulf of Mexico for the last 20 years. And so we're going to bring that technology here to Gabon and see how we can exploit it.
Chris, thank you for the thoughts on that. Looking forward again to seeing you guys advance this forward. And I go back to what Brian said, and this is definitely a good move on behalf of the company. Good strategy execution here. So thank you for that. Brian, I want to shift over to capital structure here for a moment, general and administrative, for a few updates. Talk a little bit about where we stand, Brian, on cash on hand, expected around year end, what you can say there, of course, as well as with upcoming work and really that focus on Kavango West 1X continuance here on work there, how you'd expect to fund out 2026 and what the rough budget might look like across all initiatives company-wide, and if that capital allocation will change over more towards Kavango West 1X given the findings. And then with that, if the existing warrants would be maybe the primary source of funds or something besides more equity, such as maybe debt, royalty, etc.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. We're still trying to go through our budgeting process on the cost of the production test. We'll have that buttoned down probably in the first part of January, but we're well positioned on that. You mentioned the funding in terms of warrants. Yeah, we have a bunch of warrants out there, and I encourage all shareholders to look at the position as the stock moves. We had a really nice move in the last month, basically. The share price has moved up quite a bit. But as we move into 2026, I think there'll be continued excitement on what we're doing, particularly as we start operations on the production test. So warrants have always been part of our strategy to self-fund. That's what I plan to do going forward. We'll have a much better idea on the overall budget for 26 once we get into January. Chris and I need to make a trip back over to Namibia and meet with the government, present our budget. We deferred that because of the results of Kavango were so late in the year and so many moving parts. We'll nail that down in January and then go from there. But we're well funded right now.
Brian, thank you for that. I appreciate the thoughts there. And again, it looks like we have a very good opportunity here to use some of the existing warrants there to help fund some of these initiatives forward. So thank you for the thoughts on that. Brian, remind the audience of where we are presently on shares outstanding, as well as important to mention here, key shareholders on the roster, including you, the team, and board.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So currently we have about 335 million common outstanding. In terms of major shareholders, BW is probably one of our single largest shareholders, owning about 7% of the company, around 20 million shares. And management owns roughly around 1% of that total float. So that's the capital structure right now. As I said earlier, we're well funded right now with cash on treasury. We hope the stock continues to move and warrants come in to help self-fund us.
Just as a follow-up on the general administrative side and just the general setup of the company, the concession holdings of the company, very, very large for this size of a company. If all is a commercial success at Kavango 1X, is further partnering part of the strategy to farm out some of the acreage, or is that off the table until more commercial success can be determined?
Yeah, that's a good question. We talk about that strategically. Listen, all options are on the table. Right now, we want to control our own destiny. We want to commercialize Kavango, and all hands will be on deck to bring that to first production. The scale of what we have is pretty immense here, just on the data that we have, the seismic. But we have a ton of running room in the concession in Namibia and even over to Angola. So, right now we're just going to maximize value for shareholders. That's our plan. And in my view of creating true value is converting resources to reserves and reserves to cash flow. So that's our line we're on right now. And we plan to generate that as quick as possible and grow the company.
Certainly you guys have a lot of options here, and the more success you have on the ground, the more options will open up and the more folks will be lined up at the door. Brian, just we'll stay on you for a moment, then have Chris give his follow-up questions here on this one. But as the company looks to commercial operations in the future, any comments on in-house operatorship capabilities? These capabilities of operatorship are important as you guys transition essentially from a junior explorer to now into development stages and down the line here production stages. Just talk a little bit about that in-house capabilities.
Yeah, I think on the subsurface side, we're very strong. Chris and his team not only are good explorers, they've worked on field development as well. So on the geo side, we're well set. I think going into the new year, we need to look at the engineering side of what we have, but also find a partner. I mean, this is a partnership. Although we lead the way as an operator, we will rely on BW to add to our team. I plan to put in place an integrated project team, an IPT, which will utilize the skills we have, the skills they have, and then fill in the blanks. So on the subsurface side, we're in a good spot. Drilling operations, I think we're in a great spot. One thing Nick Steinbergers and his team have proven going from Ngulu to Kavango is they hit it out of the park operationally. They drilled a really, really safe and efficient well to the maximum depth that the rig could operate in. So I have no concerns about drilling operations going forward. As you move into the project stage, we will staff up appropriately for a field development. But the one thing I'll add is this, again, it comes back to the advantage of being on shore, is this is not a multi-billion-dollar development that you see in deep water. It's going to be much more cost-effective, smaller scale, very nimble, but we'll have the right team in place to take those steps when we come across those decision gates going forward. But rely on the partnership, fill in the gaps, and then proceed to development.
Chris, anything you want to add there?
The thing with BW, we've really utilized their subsurface team really on the geophysical and geological side as we look to, to appraisal and development. We'll harness a lot of the folks that they have in-house. They're very active in Gabon, one of the largest producers in Gabon offshore, as well as Brazil. They've got all this experience in Namibia with gas markets, so we'll be utilizing their team extensively. But we will need to bolster our group as well, and we'll start to look at that as the production test comes upon us.
Sounds good, Chris. I think that's probably the right way to go here as you guys look at that and really backfill some of those areas that might need backfilling. But of course, you and Brian, you guys have extensive experience back over in the Gulf and elsewhere to be able to draw from. So I'll leave it there on that one. We talked just a little bit about the rig multiple times, JRV1, company owned. Talk a little bit about this rig here as far as limitations and what the plans would be for sourcing staffing up on equipment, essentially, if you will, on another rig that has further capabilities to test further depths, as well as production drilling with increased rigs and campaigns. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, now as I mentioned, I'm really pleased with how the operations team performed on the Kavango well. But the other thing I'll mention is they drilled pretty much a P10 curve on Kavango. We had some delays, ordered some pipe, but that's not on the drilling group. But in terms of their performance, it went really well. Now, in terms of could it go deeper, Chris and Nick are working on options. I think if we had a more customized casing string, we may be able to get a few hundred more meters beyond 4,200 with the rig. The real limiting factor in the rig is the hook load, how much you can actually lift. So that means how much steel is in the wellbore. So I think if we optimize our casing string, we may get a little bit further deeper. And I think we'll probably look at that on the appraisal well, just to make sure we test the whole section. We're not sure if we're all the way through the Ellenship. We think we're probably pretty close, but not definitive. So we want to make sure on the next well we drill, we see a full section. Now on success, we scenario plan everything. A couple things at Kavango, it's a large structure. Surface area is around 20 kilometers long by about 5 kilometers wide. So that means to develop this out appropriately, there's a lot of drilling to be done. We're not against bringing in another rig if needed, appropriate time. So we'll make that call as we go through FID. If we need another rig, higher horsepower, more efficient, then we'll go get it to make sure that we develop this field as thoroughly and as efficiently with capital as we can.
The only thing I'll say, Andrew, is we've got a great operations team. Nick Steinberger runs our group. But I just want to say that when we go to this production test, we've got one of the most competent completion experts here on the planet. So we're excited to bring that new component of his experience to Recon.
Good to hear, and definitely good to hear you guys have been able to be very efficient on the ground. That's always on-ground field challenge is always a big deal out here. Brian, just to shift over here, Recon 2.0 initiatives. This is something that's been in the background. You've been working on advancing through the strategy. A lot of this has come out in Recon 2.0, but things are still working on that initiative and that strategy as far as awareness, operational focus with a drive to cash flows, which is obviously a big key push you guys are doing here. Uplist plans, branding, etc. Just any comments on this front, Brian, as well as rough timing on some of these expectations with the initiatives?
When I came on board almost 2.5 years ago now with my business partner, Adam Rubin, and shortly after Chris, we've been on a journey of really changing the narrative around Recon and building confidence in the oil and gas sector, how we do things, and also building confidence in our shareholder base and just how we operate the company. We really tightened up disclosures the last 2 years. I think you've seen the technical decision making we had since Chris come on board with the pivot to the Marifaux Belt, and then even within the Marifaux Belt, the pivot from a planned well to a well at Kavango. That's how we operate. We operate with tremendous transparency right now. We operate with tremendous integration and partnership. That's how you build long-term value and long-term credibility. I will say Recon's view in the marketplace right now is really good. People are really appreciating what we're doing, really appreciating the patience and sticking around at play to make it work. I've had so many people compliment Recon in that sense of Kavango results. That's how you build a company, from the building blocks up. And we're a great team around. We have a really good executive team and a really strong technical team underneath Chris and underneath Nick. We need to build that out going forward. The journey is just starting right here for Recon. We've had a great turnaround of the company. I think we're well positioned technically, operationally, and we're in a different spot financially. It's time to take the company to the next level, which is what we're on the cusp of doing.
Certainly, we're looking forward to seeing some of the new things you guys have going on this front as well into 2026. Well, why don't we leave it there for this one, guys? Short of anything, of course, you want to add, we'll do it here. For potential investors who are listening in out there, Recon Energy Africa has a market capitalization of about 300 million Canadian dollars. Why should Recon Energy Africa be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors' portfolio at this stage? Brian, your comments first.
Good comment. I think Recon is one of the few small cap companies globally who's doing what we're doing. Very few companies have the risk appetite and technical expertise to go in and open up a new play. And you're seeing Recon play that strategy out live. And when you have a great team around you, great strategy and great asset base, that's a combination that's very unique. Another thing I'll add to the audience is that, in the oil and gas sector today, quite often the physical landscape is very fragmented. Look at areas like the Gulf of Mexico, look at areas like the Orange Basin. There's operators at blocks everywhere. We have the unique position of having almost the entire play locked up at a high working interest. That translates into tremendous explosive growth for shareholders as we go through this production test and hopefully success beyond that. So I don't think there's another company out there like Recon. I really do not believe it. People are looking at seeing what we do, and they're hearing how we think about exploration. We're executing, we're doing what we're saying we're going to do. And when shareholders see that, you got to jump on board, because we got something really special here that I'm super excited to be at the helm. Even more excited to have guys like Chris and Mark and Adam Rubin and Nick Steinsberger around me to help execute the strategy. So, I'm delighted for shareholders that are with us right now. I'm really honored that they stuck with us during this turnaround, but we're just beginning the story here. So we'll go from there.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, the question, why Recon? Well, one, as Brian mentioned, there's not a lot of small independent explorers out there any longer. We've got 11 million acres. Not all that acreage is going to be productive, but, we've got what looks like to be a really nice structure. But again, this is one. There's another 19 that are mapped out, and these fold belts don't just stop at the end of the seismic data. So as we move to the northwest, as we head to Angola, there's still a lot of acreage in Namibia on our block. There's going to be multiple structures that exist there. There's probably going to be structures out to the west and down to the southeast. And then you roll into Angola, you're going to have a lot of additional prospectivity. So I think just sheer size of potential volumes is one of the reasons that you really want to look at Recon.
How can people make contact with the company?
Yeah, the best route into the company is through our website and email on there to get access to investor relations. There's a full link in there to go click on. You'll get access to investor relations, and Mark Friesen is our guy that you get in hold of. He'll answer any of the questions that you may have.
Encourage the audience to reach out. All of your questions, including all the questions we weren't able to cover today, reach out to Mark, reach out to the team there. They'll get back to you on your questions. Brian, Chris, really appreciate you guys coming back to update and choosing to talk to us. Wishing you guys best of luck on commercial success in 2026.
Thank you so much. It's always great to speak to you and talk about the Recon story. It's evolving, and it's pretty exciting.
Andrew, thank you for having me on the line with you today. Appreciate you.